Hello and welcome to Tuesday Teaching on Endurance Mastery. I'm your host, as always, and coach, Matt Fitzgerald. Today's lesson is about periodization, I guess, micro-periodization. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, fire up my slides, and make the case for 9-day weeks. All right, we are on full screen. Yes, so yeah, this is brought to you by endurancemastery.com. For the 80/20 people watching, come check us out on Substack. We put out fresh content 7 days a week. Some of it free, some behind a paywall. But if you agitate, we might create a new bundle at 80/20 Endurance where you get everything you get in a gold or platinum subscription, plus an Endurance Mastery subscription. Just a thought. All right, so this is the Emperor Constantine you're looking at from ancient Babylon, the Babylonian Empire, 4,000 years ago. And this is where our 7-day week came from. Pardon me, I am going to be sipping on coffee while I present. I need it. So, in that part of the world at that time in history, ancient Egypt and Babylon, they had some really good astronomers, like the first stargazers who started to get scientific about it and be able to make some pretty cool predictions about the movements of the celestial bodies, and figured out. I mean, I guess everyone figured this out eventually everywhere, that the moon had a 28-day lunar cycle. And so that just became like a natural way to like divide up time. And that's where we get years from. It's where we get months from. And indirectly, it's where we get weeks from. I don't know who decided that. I guess like the lunar cycle has like quarters. So 7-day week is your 1 quarter lunar cycle. And then it's just kind of stuck. It caught on. And maybe it's just because there is something nice about that rhythm. Doing things once every 7 days is like taking a day off. It made its way into Genesis in the Bible. That's the story there. It's like God took 6 days to create everything and then needed to rest. So that was day 7, and then you get your 7-day week again. Point being, this is a very ancient tradition, and we as athletes, we don't often really look at it. It's all we've ever known, so we just go along with it. But I think it is worth taking a look at. Laundry list. This is what I'm talking about. Laundry list of things that many of us do every 7 days, just because we operate on these 7-day calendar weeks. Take out the garbage, go to church, shop for groceries, call mom, do an interval run if we're endurance athletes, or runners, I guess. Do an interval run, do a tempo run, do a long run. And I hope it kind of jumps out at you that things like taking out the garbage and shopping for groceries, like those are like purely just practical matters, right? But training is different. Like you're not just like conforming out of practicality. Like we're talking about biology here, physiology. You are subjecting your body to different types of training stimuli, hoping to get an adaptive effect, and then repeating those stimuli at some kind of frequency that allows you to build, right? So let's just take the obvious example, like you're trying to build endurance. So you're doing a long run or long bike ride, or maybe both, like once a week. And sure enough, that seems to be, if you do it progressively, and that's not all you're doing in the week, it's a pretty good frequency for building endurance. But like, is it optimal? Like, is it just like sheer coincidence that all these other things we do for purely practical reasons, that our biology just like happens to line up in terms of like responding to repeated training stimuli in order to develop different components of our endurance fitness. Like, okay, it's possible. The menstrual cycle lines up with the lunar cycle, so there's precedent for like biology lining up, with the stars, and then the practical things we do. But I don't think we should just assume it. And if you've been an athlete and a coach as long as I have, I mean, you start to encounter athletes who really, like, the 7-day week just doesn't seem to fit them very well. They have problems like building fitness, like, maybe it's just like a recovery thing. You can't just get recovery happening in a predictable way to build fitness. And, often the 7-day week is the culprit. And I'll show you why in the next slide. Here's why. So this is like a very typical way to get the rhythms we want as endurance athletes to conform to the traditional 7-day week. Obviously you're doing the 80-20 thing, so most of what you're doing is easy, but then you have your harder days. This is obviously not what everyone does, but it's like a pretty common default. High intensity intervals on Tuesday, moderate intensity tempo type of something on Friday, long endurance session on Sunday. So 3 days that are decidedly more stressful than the other days. And what I'm hoping you notice here is that it lacks symmetry, right? So after the interval run, you got 2 days to recover before you go hard again, the tempo run. But whoops, after that, you only get 1 easy day before you have to, the long run isn't high intensity, but it still counts as a hard session because of its duration. Like basically any workout that is either intense enough or long enough to induce significant fatigue counts as a hard day. And then again, like after the long run, you've actually only got 1 easy day before your interval run. So the tempo run here is like the lucky one, because it comes after 72 hours after the last hard effort. So that's probably often going to be a good session, or a session like you're just more ready for, consistently ready for. Whereas these other two might be hit or miss. Maybe if you just tend to recover well from long runs, the interval run is okay. But you can see why, because of the lack of symmetry, this is why athletes can start to like chafe against the constraint of the 7-day week. Because like often the squeaky wheel is like, that long run on Sunday, just 48 hours after the tempo run, they're still carrying a little junk in their legs. And so it is not always like a really quality effort. So that's the type of issue I see surfacing that makes us want to consider perhaps exploding the 7-day week. And this is what it looks like if you just provide equal space before and after every hard effort. So now you've always got 72 hours to come back around. And what this does, at a minimum, is make things more predictable. Because if you always have the same amount of recovery time after a hard workout, it's only going to take a few weeks or a few 9-day cycles before you know what's coming, and that's great. So we all have different tolerances in terms of like training loads and such as athletes, but all of us we just want some kind of predictability, because if you know how your body is going to respond after a hard effort, if you know what you're going to feel like in the next hard effort, because it's what you always feel like, because you're always in the same rhythm, easy, easy, hard, easy, easy, hard, then the planning becomes easier, and it becomes easier to progress. It may take a little fine tuning along the way, but you're not going to have to like overhaul the structure, because it's just nice and symmetrical. And those of you listening to this call probably know this already, but most commonly the athletes who decide to break out of the confines of a 7-day cycle, expand the week and go to a 9 or even a 10-day cycle, is because they're older. They're, if you're like me, started running as a preteen, and you remain an athlete, your body changes, and then you get to a certain age and you start to notice like, oh wow, the rhythm I could always count on with my training is failing me now. Like I'm not always feeling. Before I knew how to like keep from falling into a deficit with recovery, and now that's not happening. So it's very often the masters athletes who start to experiment with longer weeks, and those who are maybe retired, it's easier schedule wise because they don't have to worry about conforming to 7-day work week or 7-day school week, those types of things. So there's some fine print, this is an adjustment. So there's some things to consider before you just jump in head first. So one is like, and this is something, I had to deal with when I created our master's training plans for 80-20 endurance. I wanted to do 9-day cycles or 10-day cycles, but I didn't want to assume that athletes had time to do a really long workout on a Wednesday. So I did the 9-day cycles, but it's still on a 7-day calendar, and I just made sure that you didn't do your longest sessions on outside of the weekends. And so that's what you see here. And what you end up doing in order to get the frequency about right is when you're due for it. So it's basically the pattern is easy, easy, hard, easy, easy, hard. So when a hard day falls on a weekend, you make it a long run or a longer session. And because 9 days doesn't line up perfectly with 7, some days the longer session is going to fall on a Saturday, other days on a Sunday. And then other times, like in the second week, you see here, it's harder session on Friday, and then shorter ones on Saturday and Sunday, and then a harder session on Monday. So we're missing the weekend here, but that's okay. We just give it a miss. And what you see is you're going to be doing a long endurance session 3 out of every 4 weekends. If you do 9-day cycles and don't schedule your longest workouts on the weekends, on weekdays. So if you have the time and flexibility to do harder sessions, then it's really easy. It's just, easy day, high intensity, easy, moderate intensity, easy, long. And you just keep cycling that through over and over. And you'll be doing long runs or rides or whatever on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, whenever. But this is what it looks like if you're trying to avoid going too long out on weekdays. And then the other thing is we have like the light orange shading for the first 3 weeks and then lighter for the final week. That's your deloading week. So, you can still have like a 7-day quote recovery week or whatever you want to call it, with that just like spans, it's either straddles parts of 2 9-day cycles, or it's just 7 days within a 9-day cycle. But there's flexibility there, and you can just you just need to make sure that like you're deloading at a sufficient frequency that you don't fall behind on recovery. And there's a lot more than one way to do that. You could do you could do like just 3 light days in a row to catch up on recovery, and do that like every 27 days. So everything is still staying on a 9-day cycle. So you can just like have fun fine tuning that aspect, but but you're still following that same kind of step cycle principle where, you're building, backing off, building, backing off. And then also for the skeptics, more fine print. That might be actually the first question you ask yourself when you see, in a traditional 7-day cycle, you've got 3 harder days and 4 easier days. And in the 9-day cycle, you're not adding any harder days. So you're basically adding easier days. You have 2 more. So doesn't that water down the 80-20 intensity balance? And if you did it in just a ham-fisted way, yes, it would have that effect, which could be fine. Honestly, nothing necessarily explodes if you don't do exactly 80% of your training at low intensity. And if you are going to stray from that balance, straying in the direction of more low intensity is generally the better way to go. I mean, it's lower risk, but you don't necessarily end up, lowering the bar in terms of like how fit you can get, because you can make the harder days a little bit beefier, or some of the harder days a little bit beefier. Excuse me. And if it ends up being like closer to 90-10, you can also just do a little bit more volume as well, if you take that approach. The suggestions I have here are just more about sprinkling in opportunities to get above zone 2 outside of the designated hard days. So the nice thing is, if you have 2 lighter days after every hard day, that second lighter day, you're more recovered than you were on the first lighter day after the hard day, right? So why not toss in a little spice there? Not so much that you step on the toes of the hard workout that's coming the next day, but you can definitely afford to go a little bit harder than you did on the day before, when you were really processing fatigue from the preceding hard day. So yeah, on that, if we're looking at kind of 3-day mini cycles, easy, hard, that middle day, you could toss in fartlek surges or strides or hill sprints, just to add some spice. So it's mostly an easy zone 2 session, but not entirely. If you wanted to put in a dash of moderate intensity, you could tack on a fast finish or a short progression at the end of a zone 2 block on that second day of the 3. And then also you can add some spice into your long sessions, and that's actually a really great idea. If you've built up enough endurance to go the distance in your race, and you want to still keep progressing, you don't necessarily just keep going longer and longer and longer. You can do some harder efforts on your longer days. And so those are all ways that you can give your harder days more room to spread out, which is what you're doing in a 9-day cycle, but still maintain roughly the same intensity balance. If you are my age or older, I'll be 55 in May, then maybe you just want to switch to 9 days and not sprinkle it anymore. You're just going to move off of 80-20 a little bit in the direction of 90-10. But even there, us old guys can sometimes all right, a little less intensity, or a little less frequency of intensity, and maybe a little bit more volume, and just find that sweet spot where the total load, volume, and intensity combined meets your needs and doesn't overwhelm you. That is all. Stop my share. I will take questions from anyone who has one. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and be assertive if you have a question. I'll be so sad if I don't get a single question.
Matt, this is Mike. I do have a question.
I got one for you, Matt.
Always.
Always. Do you find any difference in how quickly they get to their fitness between the typical 7 and 9 or 10-day cycles?
No. But like I'm not trying to conduct an experiment. Like I'm coaching athletes. So like I make sure they get fitter quickly. And I'm planning a week at a time, or 9 days at a time, generally.
Mm-hmm.
So, I can do all kinds of stuff on the fly to make sure that I'm bringing them along at a good pace. So it's the same process every time. It's like, you have like a vague idea of, at least like the rate at which you're going to build, but then you apply the training and the athlete responds, and then you're adjusting. And that's all you're ever really doing is adjusting your loose plan.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's almost like, just being given a slightly different set of ingredients to cook with. It's like, you know what? If you're a good chef, you can pretty much make it taste the same in the end. Because it's like, the microcycle is one variable, one, and so the goal for me always is like to get the athlete as fit as I can get them in the time we have. And so I'm going to be using all the variables to make sure that's the case. Now, like if you were a scientist, like and wanted to just like like do like an apples to apples kind of like experiment. So you would just like, you would minimize the variables, like, and that would be the only thing you changed. And then it would be kind of interesting to see what happened. Probably you would get, some athletes who just did better, switching to on the 9 day, some better on the 7, some about the same. And maybe like, depending on maybe the age of the cohort, probably like a majority would do better on the 7-day cycle, just because it is more stimulus. So like just assuming it's not too much, but that's pretty artificial. Just like, just keeping everything the same and only changing the duration of the microcycle. That's what a scientist would do. It's not what I would recommend a coach do.
Well, I mean, you're looking at it when you looked at the charts you have. And to me, it's almost they can't help but get there faster. I think because they're just coming into the harder sessions more refreshed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like almost like little mini tapers before the race kind of thing. Just little mini tapers before getting into those hard sessions. So I don't know. I mean, I want an athlete to try this on kind of thing, right? So
yeah, there's a lot to recommend it. And I still do 7-day cycles with most of my athletes because that's what they prefer. And I can always make that work, but I love it when an athlete is willing and able to expand the week a little bit. Cause again, like that predictability is just gold, it's so valuable when you, I mean, you're always going to get surprises, but it really, so much of effective training is rhythm. And if you can just like get into a good rhythm with your training where you can build, you can recover, and you just run it back, week after week until it's time to peak and race.
Awesome.
Thanks for the question.
Matt, this is Mike.
Any others?
Can you hear me?
Coffee's cold. It's not the best beverage choice when you're giving a presentation. All right, going once, going twice for additional questions. I guess not. All right, well, that will be it for this week's edition of Tuesday Teaching. Thank you for tuning in. For those of you watching in the future, thanks as well for tuning into the recording. I'll be back next week for 80/20 people. You got to subscribe to Endurance Mastery. If you don't want to do that, I'll be back in front of you in a month. Thank you and good night.